Hello everyone, and welcome to the Clarity 1610 Supportability and Feature Training. This is Denise Saladay, and today I'll be covering the topic of action item enhancements. So what is new in the current release? We've delivered a capability where we have a new action items module that is available for investments, and that will allow you to view process action item history inside of an investment. And the second change that we made is we made some enhancements to the action item card widget on the page canvas. And lastly, we wanted to provide another mechanism for customers to respond to their process action items. And we're providing a capability where they can take action directly in email. So why is this important? Currently, there's no mechanism inside of the product where you can actually view action item history and audit trail data or status from an investment perspective for all the action items for that investment. Next, on the action item card widget in the page canvas, we've had customers request that we add the object type and instance name to the action items there in that widget for reference. And we also wanted to provide, per request, a link to the master object where possible. And we also changed some of the button behavior. And lastly, to provide a better user experience while users are working remotely, we wanted to provide a capability where they can respond and take action on their process action items directly in email, and it'll update Clarity. Let's take a look at the new action items module for investments. By default, this module is not enabled, so administrators will need to go into the blueprint and enable the module like they do other modules. We did not add any new security rights for access, so any users who have view rights for the investment will be able to see all the action items for that investment. And the module will be available for projects, ideas, and custom investments. As users navigate to the new action items module, this is what they will see. All action items are grouped into two general categories: open items and closed items. And by default, open items is expanded only in summary form and closed item is collapsed. In summary mode, we're displaying the action item subject, priority, and their current stage for every action item. Underneath the opened and closed groupings, the action items will be sorted where the most recent initiated action item will appear first, and if there's any ties for that, the next second sort criteria will be by subject. Users will see all action items here for the investment, irregardless of whether they're an assignee or not. And again, any users who have access to see the investment can view all the action items on this page. As we expand these action items, you can see more detail about them. The corresponding detail for each action item is displayed in the order that it occurred or its life cycle order. Action items typically will go through 3 stages. The first is initiated when no actions haven't been taken. Second is decisions when we have at least one assignee who responded and taken an action. And lastly is closed when all actions are completed. During the initiated stage, you'll be able to view which process triggered the action item, what date and time it was initiated, and who it was sent to. Under the decision stage, you'll be able to see for every action item who responded, what action they took, and the date and the time of their response. And finally, when the action item is closed, you'll be able to see the date and the time that it was closed. The user can hover over any name on this page, and they'll be able to see a tooltip which has the user's name and email address. And the date-time formats for this page can be determined and set under user settings in general. And the last thing that we should note is we're not showing action items detail for sub-objects within the module. Next, we're going to take a look at the enhancements that were done to the action item card widget in the page canvas. We've added the object type and instance name for every action item, regardless of which tab it appears, whether it's open, pending, or closed. And the instance name will be linkable for investments, but not for sub-objects. When you click on an investment link, it'll navigate you back to the first module that is configured to display for that investment as defined in the blueprint. The second enhancement that we made to the action item card widget is we actually modified the button behavior. The only difference that you'll see is on the Close tab. We actually removed all the buttons and instead we replaced with the user selection text. So the button behavior under Open and Pending action items is still the same as it is today. And the last feature that we'll cover today as part of this training module is responding to action items via email. I think it'll be easier to understand if we look at the flow diagram first before we start digging into the product changes. A customer will need to configure an email connection to their email services under Administration in Classic. And as part of the processing, the Clarity Process Engine is going to look for any action items where email responses need to be sent to recipients. As the signees begin to respond to these emails, what will happen is the Clarity BG, we have a hidden job that'll run every 5 minutes on the back end, and it will pull the customer's client email service and parse the email from the service mailbox that was configured. And each assignee's response is authenticated by looking at their email address in Clarity as well as the user. And the job's going to verify that the user is actually authorized to perform an action on the action item after they're authenticated. And at the end of the process, one of two things will happen. Either the job will update the action item with the user's response, or if there was a failure, there'll be a failure email sent back to the user. Next, let's look at the flow from the user's perspective. When they have an action item, then the user will receive an email in their mailbox for anything that they're assigned to and they need to take action on. And they can either open this email on a computer or on any mobile device. And when they open it, what they'll see is some detail about the action item, but there'll also be action buttons where they'll be able to click on and actually respond and take action on their action item. So once an assignee clicks on an action, then another email will open and be auto-populated with their action item response and details. And all the user has to do at this point is send the email. And the email will be sent to the customer's email service account that was configured so that it can later be processed. As you can see, we're releasing this feature in beta because we will want to make some more changes to it later. The first thing that must be done to use this capability is customers will need to configure a connection to the customer's email server, and that'll be done on this screen in Classic under Administration, General Settings, the Mail Service option. Notice that the Access Token Generated and Reset Token Generated is unchecked. It's because we don't have any connections established yet. Once a connection is established successfully, those will actually be checked, and we'll look at that a little bit later. And the values that we're looking at the screen now is what administrators will see by default. Next, we'll take a look at some of the possible values that administrators can select on the screen and the actions that they will need to take. For the mail reader protocol, either IMAP or POP3 will be available, but note that POP3 does not support OAuth. For the encryption type, they'll be able to select one of three values, either SSL, TLS, or none. The authentication types that are available are OAuth or BASIC. And the two providers that are currently available are either Google or Office 365. Under the mail account configuration, the email address is actually the service account that was created by the customer on the customer email server. A password's not required for authentication type OAuth, which is why it's null in this example. Once the administrator has populated all the values in this screen, the first thing that they'll do is at the bottom left, they're going to click on the Save button. After they do that, they're going to get a new button that appears on the screen to actually generate the authentication token. So next, they'll click on that button to generate the token. And then the next step will be navigated to the email authentication page, which we'll look at next. Here, we're authenticating using a Google email account. The first thing that you'll have to enter is the email address. And it has to be the same email address that you specified in the Clarity administration screen for the mail service configuration connection. And next, you'll enter the password for this email account. Now, you may or may not receive any screens like this. It really depends on what you have configured on your desktop. But essentially, Google's just asking for permission here on, do you want to configure this and allow access to the account? And you just need to give permission and continue through. Once the authentication is done, the administrator will then be navigated back to the Clarity Classic screen here under Administration, where they were configuring the connection. Administrators will be able to tell if a successful connection was made if the access token generated and the reset token generated attributes both have check marks, as shown in this screen. Now that we have the email account established and the connections working, we're going to take a look at what happens next with the action item. If you look at the action item at the top left-hand corner, you can see that Art Kingsley is one of the assignees, and he has to approve his task assignments for the e-commerce portal project. As soon as an action item is triggered to the recipients, each recipient then is going to receive an email. The Clarity Process Engine will send these emails, and it'll look at the user's account email address for the address to send the email to. You can see that Art's email actually has two action buttons where he can respond. He can either click approved or rejected for this particular action item. Before we look at what happens next after he clicks on one of these actions, I want to bring up a few important points. The first one is this email format for the action item doesn't use any templates, notification templates that are defined in Clarity Classic. And all action items will essentially look the same, only the buttons will be different based on how the action item was defined. And Art's going to receive this email for response regardless of whatever notifications that he has set up in Clarity. And let's say, for example, that he had maybe 3 action items that were triggered at the same time that requested a response. Each one would be a separate email. Now, once Art clicks on a response, and in this case he clicked the approved button, what will happen is he'll automatically have an email that pops up and is automatically populated and generated for his response. And it'll look like this. His response will be configured to be sent to the email service account email address that was configured in Classic. And the subject of the action item is listed here as well. In the body of the email, there's 2 elements. The first one is his response, which is approved. And the second section is really, it's an encoded response that Clarity is going to use to actually update the action item in Clarity with the response. So we want to make sure that we don't delete or update anything in that section, or else the response won't get updated correctly in Clarity. Now, Art's response won't actually be saved in Clarity until he actually sends this email, so he has to click the Send button. Art's response will be authenticated by first looking at the email address for him and where this email is coming from. And the second thing is the job will also check whether he's a valid assignee for this particular action item. And you're probably wondering what would happen if Art forwarded his action item email to somebody else within his organization, either inside or even an external person. So let's say that Art forwards it to Debbie, who's one of his co-workers, but she's not an assignee for the action item. What'll happen is when she'll actually get the email, and she'll have actions that she can click on, and once she clicks on them, she'll get an email pop up that's pre-populated like this one, only of course it'll come from her, and she'll choose the action and she'll click send. But what'll happen is her response email is actually going to be ignored by Clarity because she's not a valid assignee for the action item. She's also not going to get any response indicating that her action wasn't saved. However, if for some reason the Art's response failed and it wasn't able to be saved in Clarity, he'll actually receive a failure email. But we are not sending any emails to confirm success whenever Clarity is updated. Once Art submitted his email response, you can see from the other screenshot of the action item that his approval response was actually captured as a decision on the action item. We have now reached the demonstration portion for this supportability training. The first thing that I'm going to show you is how to activate and view the new action item module within an investment. Next, we're going to take a look at some of the enhancements in the action item card widget on the page canvas. And lastly, we're going to actually walk through the configuration that will enable Clarity users to respond to action items directly in email and actually look at what happens when the assignees respond. The first thing that I'm going to demo today is how to configure the new action items module to show up in investments. So under administration, click on blueprints. I'm going to select the major project blueprint, put it in edit mode, and under modules here you'll see that the action items module is available, so we just need to drag it over. I'm just going to put it at the end here, and you click publish. So next, let's navigate over to the e-commerce portal project, which is the project that is using this blueprint, and we'll go in and take a look at the module. You can see it's called action items. Now on this screen I'm going to see all action items for this particular investment e-commerce portal, regardless of whether I'm an assignee or not. And you can see that they're grouped in two major area categories: open items and closed items. Open items is expanded just one level in summary form by default, and closed item is collapsed. Now I'm going to expand one of the open items so you can get an idea of what kind of data it's showing. This particular action item is in the decision stage, and each action item will essentially pass through three different stages. The first one being initiated, the second one decisions, and the third one is closed. And you can see here that so far we have 3 approvers out of 9 who have approved the action item. You can see the date and the time for each approval. You can also see which process triggered the action item under the initiated stage and all the list of recipients who will receive the action item. And there's a hover on the screen here that you can see more detail for each resource whenever you click on it. Next, I'll expand this closed action item And you can see there's two levels. This is the summary level. And under here, we're seeing the same type of information for the open action item, only it's closed and it'll have the date and the time that it was closed. Under each open or closed category, the action items are going to appear in the order of the most recent initiated action item will be shown first in the list. And the details under the action item are presented in the life cycle stage of initiated, decisions, and closed. Now that we've looked at everything for the new action items module for an investment, let's navigate over to the action item page widget on the canvas. And we'll take a look at the enhancements that were done there. The first thing we added is the object type and the object name for every action item. For action items against master objects like project, for example, there's actually a link that if you click it, you'll be navigated to the first tab that's presented to show for the blueprint for the project. So let's just click on that. And you can see that I was navigated to the e-commerce portal properties page. Now if we had any action items in this action item card widget that were for sub-objects, we would, and let's just use task as an example. What we would see is task : and the task name, and it would be in black because we're not providing links for sub-objects, only master objects. And the last thing that I wanted to show you that we made in this card widget is we actually changed some of the button behavior. So on the Open tab, you can see that this user has actions they can take approved or rejected, and nothing has changed here on the Open tab. In the Pending tab, nothing has changed here. The action that was taken was done, but we did change the behavior on the Close tab. Before, you used to be able to see done, which was the action the user took, and you could click on it, although nothing would happen or be updated in Clarity. But to avoid some confusion, we decided to remove the buttons, and instead what we're showing is the selection that the user has taken for this particular action item that closed. The last thing that I want to demo today is the capability to allow users to respond to their action items directly via email. In order to use this capability, administrators will need to configure this screen on Classic, which can be found in the menu under Administration, General Settings, and the option is Mail Service Beta. In our example today, we're going to connect to the Google Mail Service. So I'm just going to start to populate this screen. And I'm going to use port 993 and click Active. And then I'll select IMAP with SSL encryption. And for the email address, this will be an account in the client's email server. And because I'm going to be using OAuth, I don't need a password. The provider will remain Google, and I'm just going to populate the client ID. And next I'm going to populate the client scope and the client secret too. Now notice that the access token generated and reset token generated is blank, unchecked, and that there's no other buttons here. So the next thing that I'll do is I'll click Save. And as soon as I click Save, I'm going to get a new Generate OAuth token button. So next I'll click on this button, which will navigate me for the Google account authentication page. And I'm just going to select use another account even though I already have this account figured. So I'll enter my email address for this account, click next, and then next I'm going to enter the password, click next. And depending on which client you're authenticating to, you may get windows that appear like this. I'm just going to click continue because this is what I want to do. Click continue here that I want to trust the connection. And as you can see, now I'm navigated back to my classic screen that I've been configuring. Now I can tell that my connection was successful because now the access token generated and the reset token generated are both checked. I've started a process on the e-commerce portal, and we'll just go take a look at the status of it. Please approve your task assignments. You can see that it was initiated and triggered already, and an action was sent to 4 recipients: Cheryl Amos, Paul Burks, Jason Berry, and Art Kingsley for a response. And nobody has responded just yet. So next we're going to go take a look at the email that Art Kingsley received in his inbox to take action on this action item. This is the email that Art received to respond. You can see that it contains the subject and the project e-commerce portal that he needs to respond to with the description of what he needs to do. He needs to either approve or reject his task assignments. Now these buttons are actionable, so let's click on approved. And you can see what happens is another response email was automatically generated to the client email service account email address, and it has the subject, and his response right here is approved. Now below that, inside of the number sign, is the encoded details that Clarity's going to use to actually process this action item. So you want to make sure that you don't update or delete anything. The user at this point would just need to click send, and I'll go ahead and do that now. Now there's a hidden job that runs in the background that customers won't be able to configure. But what it'll do is every 5 minutes it'll run automatically, and it will pull that email account for any responses from assignees on action items, and then it will process them and update Clarity. And as our final step, let's go back into the e-commerce portal project and see if our action item was actually updated with the response from Art Kingsley. And you can see that 6 minutes ago his response was updated and captured correctly. And this concludes the session on the supportability training for action items. Thank you.